This week's episode is brought to you by Parrot Dog, limited release 28, a hazy DIPA programmed with crush, strata, and citra hops. Prominent tropical and stone fruit hop characters give way to a super soft mouthfeel and low bitterness. Juicy, bubbly, and nice. This week we've cracked into the vault and pulled up an episode that we recorded at the end of last year. Thought we'd lost this one, but seems like we've managed to retrieve it and bring it to you guys this week. Super excited about this one. We discuss program, form, and function, and all things in between. So sit down, get your bubble diagrams ready, and let's crack in.
Welcome back. Hello, this is Gerard. Here with the Design Principles podcast. Today we're endeavouring to talk about program. What is program? It's a very architectural term. We like to throw around weird terms that nobody else understands and that we're still trying to understand ourselves. So here we go. I sort of think program is it's the nuts and it's kind of like your bubble diagram, I guess, if you're in the design process, your rooms and stuff. But then as you change scale, I think that relationship moves as well. So like a house is a program to a street within the street. It's part of the program of a street. Road is a part of the program of a city. What do you guys reckon?
I sort of pegged it down to, well, firstly, how do you spell it? M-E or no M-E at the end?
I'll be honest, I don't know when to use either of those.
American version is ME in the end in English.
Isn't it the other way around?
No, I don't think so. I think the American is PROGRAMM.
This is a debate worth having.
I've Googled it before.
I'm all about programming.
Programming, are you?
Yeah.
I weirdly, when I'm like writing a program, like sort of like a Gantt chart type program, I weirdly use PROGRAMME, but I definitely prefer the short version.
Anyway, sorry, I digress. It's always bothered me because I don't think there's a right answer. Gerard, you pretty much nailed what it is in a nutshell. I mean, I've sort of got
done. Podcast over.
Yeah, exactly. I've sort of got 6 points here of what like program includes, or what program looks to address.
6 steps to programming.
Yeah, and that's like purpose and functionality, spatial requirements, the user's experience, technical requirements, aesthetic preference, and then regulatory constraints. And so it's how all of those things impact each other and how really the functional requirement is probably the biggest driver, in turn affects all the other things around it.
Yeah. I think some good examples of how I kind of see program is OMA's Seattle Library. Do you guys remember that one? It's kind of like boxes stacked on top of each other and then just like a big glass facade that blends them all together. But it just started off with these real basic masses. The top box is headquarters, then the next one's books, then assembly, then staff, then parking, and then the facade just like wiggles between them all. Right. I think that to me is like a real strong form driver from program. So splitting the building up. But then I guess that one's interesting because it's got all these in-between spaces between the boxes, which is probably the public space.
It's quite a literal transformation of program to form, really, though, isn't it?
Yeah, super literal, which I guess might happen lots in architecture school, or you might think it would happen lots in architecture school, but probably doesn't actually happen very often in life, which probably makes it a pretty interesting building to encounter. Which kind of like comes back to the point of why I wanted to talk about program, because I think it's such a useful tool and as a design driver, kind of trick you into using different forms, definitely in that OMA scenario. Without that diagram, you'd never come up with that shape of building.
Do you guys when you, on that diagram idea, when you guys are designing in the very early stages, do you still bubble diagram?
I did it the other day, actually, after our initial programming discussion. I was like, yes, this is something I need to experiment with a little bit more. So
But you still haven't made any models.
Pulled out the bubble diagrams, and now the models are coming soon.
Models will come soon.
Coming soon. But I found the bubble diagramming very useful, though. It was just like an easy way to start to organize some spaces.
I really enjoy it because it's so fast. And to your point, Gerard, on influencing form, you might start with, a bunch of separated bubbles with each programmatic or each like functional requirement that's given to you by the client. So let's say that might be kitchen, living, public, private, open, closed, whatever they may be, or it may be as simple as individual rooms. It might be 3 bedrooms. You have 3 bubbles for bedrooms or bathrooms, whatever, however your arrangement is. But, you start with those all separated, and then you start to mesh them together and stack them on top of each other and how you envision them interlinking. I find it really helpful to work through that process of moving the bubbles around and then connecting them with arrows, how you see that interlinking of
the transitional
spaces.
spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something that you guys do?
Yeah, definitely. And the same with the inside versus the outside. And yeah, as Gerard was saying before, like to a different scale. So the house versus the street, I think that's all very, very useful. So pro bubble diagram.
Interesting that I haven't really thought about bringing in the like wider context program into like the bubble diagram. So it's definitely something like a technique or a tool to look to implement. Because I quite often as well, in terms of scale, I'll initially start with my, let's say 10 fingers, 10 bubbles. But then, and they're all the same size, but as you sort of start to nut out the priority of each one of those functional requirements, the bubbles will increase or decrease in size. You might have 3 or 4 little bubbles, which are utility, bathrooms maybe, and then you might have one massive bubble, which is like a key space, be that a bedroom, or be that, the kitchen, living, dining, or be that whatever. And that I find that quite useful for then starting to arrange a plan and space and understand, the scale of spaces beside each other as well.
Well, I just went ahead and scaled the bubbles to roughly how many square meters that space needs to be. But going back to your larger scale stuff, because we do like more development type, so when you're using it for like in a development, it's really important to know like how each building's going to be interacting with each other, as well as what's happening within that building itself.
Yeah, totally.
So that's probably why we, incorporate like the streetscape and that sort of thing a little bit more.
Yeah, controversial. I don't tend to use the bubble diagram.
Really?
The program man.
Yeah, I thought you'd be a huge proponent for the bubble diagram.
I'm doing the closest thing to the bubble diagram on a project at the moment where we're dealing with stricter size requirements. But usually I'm very loose, make it up. It's hard to post-rationalize my design process. I'm kind of always balancing like literal program with architectural intent. And sometimes, I guess I mentioned before, design as program. Maybe I am down that angle a bit more. So previous job, I was kind of struggling to get it to work until I found a sort of a conceptual driver, which was like birds in the bush, because it's a bush site and it's a very complex, a lot of program. So I didn't want to like end up creating something quite monolithic or too regular in a bush setting. So I wanted something sort of scattered through, keep trying to maintain like the beauty of being in the bush. So I kind of landed on turning the buildings into birds, and then they're not allowed to, like, birds don't really stand in line unless they're on a power line, I guess. That kind of like started to drive my would-be bubble diagram. So I guess I was kind of designing outside in that scenario. But I think I change my technique every time. So I don't really have like a consistent technique to the design. It's chaos.
So would you say you follow like a more of a, to use, the Louis Sullivan maxim, like more of a form follows function approach, or would you say you're the opposite, or would you say it's project specific? Because for me, I think I'm probably more of a form follows function direction is the way that my design evolves.
I try to achieve both ideally. So I don't think I don't know. I kind of refuse to believe you can't have form and function. Surely, maybe that's just me. But
no, I'm not
the whole
saying that. But it's more like what comes first in your approach. Like, is it the chicken or is it the egg?
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely different each time. I think the thing that is consistent is that I try to find a unique take on each project. Because architecture is so long and you spend so long, it's like a really long-term relationship in an architecture project. It's pretty committing. I want to spend that sort of engaging in an interesting idea or a theme. Every project I try to have something kind of unique in there, whether it's making birds as buildings. Like Mum's place is a big courtyard, but then you have to go outside to get from living to the bedroom. Based on a quote I found, I think, from some old Olsen Kundig yarn about how it's good for you to go outside. So sometimes it might just be a theme like that. That's probably where the design is. But then it's always meshed in with trying to make shit affordable, what your budget is. And then that might simplify your building down to a box and then simpler cladding forms.
Just diving a little bit deeper on that building, my buildings are birds concept. How do you create the program? Because obviously it sounds like you're creating the forms, which are, based on various bird types. But then how do you actually create the program of the building?
So those ones have quite specific program. So I guess from the bush aspect, the program is a bird. From the external aspect, but as the internal program, one of them's a med centre, one of them's social services. There's various other lettable spaces.
But how are you designing the program?
So with the med centre, it's with the medical clinic, so they have quite a strict program. So it's very back and forth between what they want and what they have. So our last meeting, I had ArchiCAD open with them, which actually worked out amazingly.
Through this process, Gerard, are you coming up with a form and then a conceptual form or a conceptual direction and then making program fit? Or are you creating the program in an outline of how you may want to create the form and then sort of draping the form over it, for want of a better term, or moulding the form to it?
Yeah, it's a mixture of those two.
Okay.
Because it's such a strict program, it needs to work properly. But then I need it to work properly from my architectural direction as well. So playing with the architecture, I see it as right in the middle of form follows function and function follows form. So it's really don't see the compromise there.
Because it's interesting, that project that you talked about, there's the Seattle library, that's very much a program generated form where you've got your program and, for want of a better term, you've stacked all of these bubbles, all these blocks, and you've basically draped a cloth over the top of them, and that's created your building. Whereas something like Liebeskin's Jewish Museum, to me, that's very much formally driven, and then program has been made to fit within it. And that's sort of forced this strong tension and juxtaposition of space.
Isn't that Holocaust Museum very linear layout? So that does work really well for the exhibition because it is a progression of spaces from my understanding, having never been there.
It is, and it is like that, but when you're in it, it doesn't feel like that. And I don't know if the intention was to create a chaotic sense, but there's order to the chaos, but it seems driven by chaos first, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I think because he's got purposely put beams across spaces and stuff, to create that feeling of chaos, because he's telling a pretty strong narrative. I think both those examples could be argued the other way as well. The Seattle Library is such a unique form that maybe that's using the argument of program to validate form as architecture. Yeah. I think just some of those old school quotes are
a bit black and white.
And both those examples I think are pretty good examples of awesome form and awesome program, meshing in a really cohesive, successful way. Whereas if we listen to too many of the old boys who like to boil life down into one sentence, let's make new quotes.
Yeah,
form and function.
Let's go for it. Do you know the classic, and this is a slight digression, but a classic program influences form. I don't know how much you guys know about city planning of Wellington. The city was first designed in the UK, but for the hut. And they arrived here and the land was too boggy, it was too swampy. And they're like, well, we can't build a city here. So we'll put it on the harder, better surface material on the other side of the harbour. And it was better sheltered from the weather and things like that. Well, I thought it was. But they didn't really change the city design. They sort of just dropped it over the Wellington landscape. So you went from a flat site to an incredibly hilly site, and which is why we have so many weird, twisted streets, because they had to take this very regular city plan and make it fit an incredibly irregular site, which I find just so hilarious.
Yeah. It's also worked out fairly well in the grand scheme of things. Otherwise you get places like Hamilton, which is like a grid for his eyes. As far as the eye can see it.
I mean, it's created a very dynamic city. Some people would say frustrating.
Yeah, learning the roads around Mount Vicar took me a little bit back in the day. I think to push the program thing a little bit further, I think there's interesting way to define space through the use of program. I think something I think about sometimes is how in love with the wall we are, for obvious reasons. A wall is solid, easy, nice, predictable object. But you can kind of use program in a way to define space without walls. Or I think the Sana project, the Rolex Learning Center, is a big kind of almost loose topography. It's like a blanket of a building, but she's used a rolling hill to define the space. So I think you go over the hill and then it's a massive building. So it's you walk over the hill and that defines one space from the other. I think relationships of how we define space is stuff that I find super interesting. Love to experiment with in the future. Yeah, another one's Holtrop, and Holtrop's got a apartment concept, which is just if you drop paint on the ground, it's a big wiggly splatter sort of shape. And there's no doors. I think you just walk down these long hallways and then around the corner, then you gain the privacy for a bedroom or something. So it's these weirder ways of defining your space, but lead to an interesting space.
You can definitely tell when you're in a space that has absolutely nailed the program.
Do you know what's quite interesting is all of these examples that we're talking about here are larger civic buildings or commercial buildings or education facilities or whatever, like libraries, museums, all this sort of stuff. Less so far that we've discussed anyway, things like housing or maybe retail or hospitality or anything. Do you think that there's the same... I mean, I totally think that there's the same opportunity to be able to approach program and specifically what we're talking about here at the moment, sort of the removal of the wall in these areas. But do you think that's a harder battle given, the slightly more defined programmatic spaces that you're required to interlink?
Talking about privacy,
taking a shit, bedrooms, whatever, be that to your own housemates, family, neighbours, whatever. And equally, take hospitality, for example, the front of house to back of house relationship, and whether that's that's an open, whether it's an open relationship or not, things like that. Equally, retail, changing facilities and all that sort of thing. It'd be really interesting to see, or if any listeners or if you guys have any examples that sort of fit that same mold of removing the wall or challenging the conventions of program, I guess, in those sort of buildings that have a far more standard, I guess, or regimented programmatic scheme.
I did a cafe in Newtown, Frank's in Newtown, which we kind of like opened the back of house. So the concept was that kind of exposed back of house a little bit, and then with the idea that it makes people feel welcome and part of the space. And then we put seats sort of on each end of the bench. Some of these things have kind of been taken over, and there's no longer any seats on the end of the bench. It was a little bit too small. But I'm not sure how successful it was, because you got the sterilizer and kitchen kind of exposed to some of the back tables, and you got to walk past it. But the design relied on a very clean cafe.
Yeah.
And we antsed over all the storage space, and we're like, all right, we've done this to death. We've got storage for everything. Everything has its place. But if you go into Frank's Newtown now, it's kind of chaotic, and there's bags of beans and shit piled up against the wall, and another fridge up against the wall. So it's like, if it's not maintained at how it was intended, it wasn't going to work.
And I kind of feel like I know exactly what you mean, and I sort of think the same from a residential point of view. I love the idea of the wall-less house. But say, for instance, you've got somebody in the home that's an intense snorer. Kind of want to be able to lock that person away, and or other noisy activities which use your imagination. But there's the design concept that we have, and sort of that maybe idealistic view on how a space may be used or designed to be used or whatever. But in reality, is it or can it be successful? Yeah. And I like, Gerard, your honesty in that you tried this thing and really ultimately it wasn't successful. Maybe not necessarily wasn't successful as a space. I mean, Frank's is still a cool cafe, but you're not true to your original design intent. And I think sometimes we can often get lost in our concepts and then reality strikes, and it can quite often bring a project down.
Yeah, that cafe actually was the last time I was very thorough about a bubble diagram.
Right.
Me and Luke Malhop designed that together, and we drew a bubble diagram, and we're coloured in the bubble diagram. We're like, hey, this is kind of cool. Let's just build this. So if you go to Frank's, everything's circular. So it's
a literal bubble diagram.
So it was literally
very literal.
An extrusion of a bubble diagram.
Love it.
That kind of reminds me of, when you put a new lawn down and you need to put some sort of pathway in, but you just let people use the lawn, walk over the lawn naturally until tracks occur, and then you're like, okay, cool, that's the most efficient place to put the pathway. How much of the program should actually, happen organically or naturally?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And this kind of comes back to our conversation last week on material. How far can you push the extreme of a concept? And I like that idea, Ben, of could you almost have a building that's completely naked and over the time, but it has an intended use, whatever that may be. And over time, the way that people interact and use it, say you have a test period of 18 months or something, and then that will drive the final outcome. That could be really cool idea.
Interesting test.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Is that the Kanigawa Institute, old Ishigami's building of trees? Beside his big swoopy outside building, he's got I think it's a workshop, part of a workshop. But it's just a giant open room made with like 1,000 columns, basically, all tiny little miniature columns. And there's no program in there. It's just like full open space, and people kind of inhabit it how they will. So like his renders versus like what it's like now when you see videos like Kevin from Archie Marathon, how his video of that space came out like a few days after our talk with him.
Cool.
Yeah, you should have a look at that video, and people have just put tables and benches everywhere.
But the columns I guess, have still influenced the space to a degree. Like, it'd be interesting if they were, this is pie in the sky concepts, but if they were movable and as people used the space, it shifted and moved and, like a shifting sand dune almost.
Yeah. Those columns were based on a forest, so they're all very irregular. So there's a forest. It's a very conceptual forest, ultimately. But yeah, how much can you direct people? Keta Barn did a house, I think it was called Picture Frame House. It's like a big empty shed, basically. And then the bedrooms are little boxes on wheels. And then you can kind of push your boxes around. So that would be a real interesting project to do, like a post-occupancy review. So like, has it been used as intended, or have the boxes been pushed into one location and that's where they will remain? Yeah. There's an interesting project that came out when I was tutoring with girl Megan Storm. We did like a topography house. So it's sort of based on the idea of a landscape inside a building. And then I guess an extreme version of the Sano project, Rollock Centre. So you go over hills, and like that is your differentiation of space. I think the bathroom was like in the ground. So you're trying to tackle these issues. I just think there's space in the world for like the super exciting conceptual projects, but maybe on like a tree hotel sort of aspect. A tree hotel where they build weird, wacky buildings, but then ultimately they're on Airbnb or something. It'd be kind of a cool thing for people to explore. You build outrageous buildings and then people can come experience them, because it would be hard to live with a family in a room in a house that's just a skate park, essentially.
Exactly right. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, is that it takes a special type of client or a special type of function or use to be able to explore this sort of thing. Like you said, having a family home with this kind of like crazy concept is in reality not going to probably get across the line. You might present it to the clients. Odds on it's going to be a hard sell.
Yeah, architecture is often
hard sell.
Responds to like your clients' attitude to risk, how adventurous they are.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I mean, this is a discussion that we want to have at another time. But I think this sort of extreme, not even extreme, but just more conceptual push of the idea program is definitely like applicable to the realm of competition as well. And I think there's not enough, because there's no fear. Like in competition, there's no fear. Like, or not fear, but there's there's no risk, or there's no sort of potential negative outcome other than not winning the competition. But it's not a loss, because you still learn so much in the process. But I think there's not enough competition in architecture in all aspects: commercial, civic, even residential, and then obviously the purely conceptual. But I think competition is definitely somewhere where you could start to come up with these brilliant ideas. And the thing is, people aren't going to know what they like until they've presented it, and you might surprise yourself. But I'd say, and personally, like so often, nervous to or fearful to kind of really push a crazy, particularly programmatic concept, because you don't want to do a shitload of work and it be rejected and then you have to redo it.
Yeah, that's. I think the competition thing could be an antidote to New Zealand's sort of
benign built environment,
uninspiring public architecture.
Just uninspiring everything. Yeah.
Asking Kevin about the what houses in New Zealand he would come and visit. It's
I mean,
literally only residential, isn't it? Like that's the only.
but that's the crazy
interesting-
thing. I mean, we do housing really well. It's beautiful, but we do bespoke housing very well. I'd say the vast majority of our housing is pretty damn average.
Yeah, we don't have any Seattle libraries. But yeah, I think that's competitions. I think you're far more likely to receive some interesting proposals via competition.
In a world where design speaks louder than words, what story does your space tell? At Ortex Acoustics, they believe great design is more than aesthetics. Every product they create strikes a perfect balance between form, function, and sustainability, made to enhance how a space sounds, looks, and feels. From using recycled materials to pioneering carbon-negative wool, their commitment is to help you shape environments that inspire people and respect the planet. Explore the future of acoustics design at ortexacoustics.co.nz. So other than the wall, Gerard, I mean, we sort of talked about that reinventing the concept of the wall. I mean, have you looked at any other aspects of more standard aspects of a building that you could look to reinvent?
I think there's a lot more to the wall as well. Like there's a varying degree there. Like you see curtains being used a bit architecturally, like maybe more internationally, like to define like a lounge nook or something. So like maybe that's the retractable. Maybe if you had a big ceiling grid, giant grid, foot by foot or something, and then you have this multi-configurable curtain space. You could reconfigure your house as you wish. I just think like how we define the spaces, I think, what I find really interesting. Even down to some people do more of like the sort of camping style where you have like a series of buildings and then a canopy, and then you I can't remember the house, but I think Kirsten showed that in one of her lectures back in the day. She did at architecture school. That's kind of based on tenting. So I think that one had external access to different spaces.
Sort of each individual program's its own building, and they're enveloped in this canopy or enveloped in a roof form.
Yeah, which you could really push. You could push that really hard.
I've thought about that concept quite a few times, and I love the idea. And then actually for my own house, but then every time I come back to it, I'm like, shit, that's a lot of external cladding work, which means a lot of this.
But it's also
and when it's your own money, that matters a lot.
Yeah, hard out. It'll also probably allow you to stage a project quite nicely.
Totally, and potentially, even with the changes, if that 60 square meter granny flat type rule comes in, what are you looking at there? Could you build an entire house sans consent almost? And at some point you tie it all together, but that'd be a really interesting sort of approach as well. And that kind of comes back to that original, those sort of 6 points of program that I talked about. That's almost a program in itself, the way that you approach a build like that.
Everything is program.
Everything is program.
And some of those like tight apartment complexes where you've got like multifunctional spaces. Your apartment's like 3 meters wide by I don't know, like say 6 or 8 meters, but you've got to squeeze in, a kitchen, a bed, a living space, and so it's configured in such a way that you can kind of like shift things around, move walls, and reconfigure it.
I think tiny houses are a great, relatively well understood example of that. Everything in a tiny house has a multiple function. You can't afford, when you're working with such a tight program, you can't afford for something to have single use. Every floor is a bed and every wall is a cupboard, or, whatever that may be. And I quite like that multi-use aspect. I sit here just looking around in the studio down here, and there's 4 walls with some windows, but like the function of the walls is purely a wall. They're not doing, you can hang art and whatever on them, but that's it. It's doing nothing else. And I like that idea of it having a higher purpose.
Those small space projects, like what's the old saying? The lack of maximum parameters kind of breed interesting outcomes.
Totally.
Like the transformer space is, you kind of always end up with some interesting, quirkier takes on things.
I wonder if that's just because you're it's a smaller thing to sort of comprehend, and so you've got space to be more creative and more it's a more of a craftsman approach than say you're not gonna, well, unless you've got an insane budget, your level of craftsmanship on like a 700 square meter home is not going to be anywhere near the level of like craftsmanship that you as a designer is able to put in, or the builder even is able to put into like a 60 square meter home.
Dependent on budget.
Yeah. I mean, anything can be done with unlimited funds and time.
Yeah. Those Queenstown builds, take 3 years for a reason.
Yeah.
I designed this container house idea back in the day, which was, the idea was that you flip a container on its end, so it's like sticking up like a tower, and then you suspend all the program from the ceiling. Rather than going to the bedroom, you bring the bedroom to you. So you're interchanging your program into the same space.
Wow.
Push it back up, and then you pull down like the kitchen bench, and then you do your kitchen, and then you push it back up. The bathroom, however, was on the side of the tower.
You had to let one
You
go.
wouldn't want to be pushing that back up.
But yeah, it's not that keen on a bucket,
I mean, Gerard, you've sort of talked to us. Maybe you don't want to give away any of your trade secrets, but you've that's such an awesome way of reinventing program. You've sort of talked about other ones like the advent calendar type idea as well.
Yeah, so that was came out the back of the uni project as well. At uni, the idea was that I was farming design ideas for my next 10 years. Recommend everyone to go tutor university students for a semester. I think
Get some inspiration.
you get a lot out of it. Like the freedom of thinking at uni is you try to comprehend it. You're like, oh yeah, I can think of crazy ideas. But when you're just in a room of people that are actively, because you set the parameters as I did in that scenario, so you can kind of direct the focus on what you're thinking about. So that whole course for me was a program. So we were actively trying to come up with new program ideas without relying strictly on the wall. So it's like when you go down the Olsen-Kundig route of moving things around with pulleys and cables, or like the Sana route of moving over hills. And this other one was sort of like an advent calendar. So I just like the idea of like a very crisp conceptual space, big empty room. And then there's just a series of hatches in the floor. So you lift up a hatch and there's all your bedroom, your bed, and maybe a rack of clothes on the side. Another one, there's a bathtub, or there's a kitchen in the other one. So then you're like stepping down 900 mil or whatever. I think as an experiential space, I think it's pretty amazing to be able to pack your house away, and then you have this big hall for parties.
Well, I was going to argue, that comes back to that classic, you come up with the idea, but the user experience is quite different. I could see someone being like, oh, this is so fucking annoying, and just leaving it open all the time.
Yeah, like that's the prerogative of the user, I guess.
That's your December 20.
Yeah, that'll be chaos. Or you just like push, or you just sweep all the shit into one of the empty.
Do you just have like a rubbish pit room?
Yeah. What else you got hidden in those dungeons?
Yeah, underneath it's a giant funnel and it goes to a big rubbish truck.
That is a good idea. Those like underground rubbish removal facilities. I think they've got them on one of the islands. I can't remember what island it is in New York. But you put all your rubbish into like a rubbish hatch. It goes down into like a collection chamber and shoots it off island. One of the islands in the Hudson. It's pretty cool.
Really?
One of those for people.
Yeah.
I got to go to work. I'll get my work tunnel.
That's the Jetsons, isn't it?
Yeah, the Jetsons.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Ben, like, how much do you think program has evolved, or has it really?
Well, how much do you think regulatory constraints affect program? Is that why it's easier to have like a obvious change in program in more commercial realms.
But I also think it comes back, and
residential.
we've said this a few times, it comes back to the client's appetite for something different. And I'd say that so many people are black and white that they don't really see, they come to you and they go, okay, we want a 3-bedroom house. And in their head, it looks like every other 3-bedroom house. In terms of the program, every space is individual. It'd take a special kind of client to come to you being like, I'm totally open to anything. Build me an advent calendar home. So I think it's probably more, not that we don't have these ideas, but I think it's more the ability to implement them than it being a regulatory constraint.
I don't think you can sit back and wait for somebody to come to you and ask for that type of architecture. That's you have to push that upon people, or in the concept client engagement phase, you got to see what they actually
Spoken
want.
like a true architect. Yes,
you will accept this idea.
Something outrageous.
I don't care what you like.
Architect / Jedi.
You will like.
This is what you want.
You will like my house.
This is why I
This is good architecture
projects.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think, Ben? Do you think that the regulatory framework does restrict our program? Because it's not like the building code or, anything like that's out there saying that you have to have separated bedroom spaces and you have to have walls, other than obviously the structural requirement or whatever, but to a degree, obviously. But you know what I mean? Like, it's not saying it's not saying like these are the programmatic requirements you have to meet. So I think we've caught ourselves in thinking that it does.
I think that's what we
really
perceive as comfortable spaces these days. As much as I love the idea of the advent calendar house and that sort of thing, day to day, I'm not sure if it's going to be the most practical way of living.
Imagine like getting up in the middle of the night, super dusty, and you have to like open a hatch to find your toilet, and you open the wrong hatch, and then you're like,
you fall into the kitchen. But you hope you fall into the couch, not the kitchen. Like, what about the dishes in there? You got to clean the kitchen properly. I'm way too lazy for that. Way too lazy. Although, if it had that whole recycling rubbish situation going on, then make life a bit easier. I think, like, for me, it's more basic. It's around what's happening on the site, whether orientation, garden, landscaping, all of that sort of thing, as opposed to having like a big open space and more of a dynamic built environment. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm still working through it. I'm still learning.
We're pushing the boat all the way to all the way out the end at this point. Yeah, for context, the Advent calendar at the moment is drawn as an A-frame in its current iteration.
Nice.
For a bit of land on my own land. So you got to, if you can't test these ideas on yourself. But that's sort of cross-programmed with the idea of a sort of chapel, like a wedding venue. It's A-frame that's sort of falling down a hill, so it's got to introduce another element. It's got a sloped floor, ridges, level. Got a small triangle at the top, and then big triangle at the bottom, and a truncated A-frame. So on the slope, you then have the hatches as well. So then down at the bottom is all kick out, and then a little waterfall into a kitchen. The current iteration has sort of 2 layers of hatches. So the top layer is like the chapel. So then that turns into stairs. So it turns into a normal terraced space. But then when those are down, you lift up a bigger hatch, and that's like your bedroom or desk. But this is like the base use is like it's a ski hut, book a batch. So it's not like a full on house. Yeah. But this one does have a bathroom off to the side.
Bathroom, toilet, and a hatch. You can choose to squat at floor level or walk down into the toilet.
This one's got a whole room off the side with a mega window and a big view, out to the bush.
When can we expect that to be finished construction?
Million years. Who knows?
What are some other unique programs that you've come up with? I'm feeling inspired. Maybe I need to get more creative.
There's this other hotel in Norway. I think it was part of the Ex Machina, some AI robot movie. There's these series of houses in the bush, but they're kind of like just regular versions of Holtrop's kind of finger idea. So they're kind of like wiggly rooms that like offshoot. So you have, rather than doors, you have kind of like a bend in the room. But again, these are like single unit things where you go around the corner and then there's the bed down the end. And it's got like a big window and tree. So like, in plan, you've got some more irregular wiggles. And then it sort of moves around these trees and stuff as well. Don't have to chop anything down.
We've talked a lot about like maybe not extreme, but the very intensive take on Reinventing program. But Ben, it'd be interesting to get your take, particularly in the realm that you work in, a bit more of that medium density development stuff and how you can influence sort of the generic program in that. And a project that kind of springs to mind is Block Party by Spacecraft. If you think about a standard homes program, and then they've just pulled out aspects of that can be very public and then made that shared. And that's how that's influenced the spaces. And it's meant that they've been able to bundle a lot of program and a lot of usable space into a small site, because not every home needs to have their own outdoor patio. Why can't all 6 homes share it? And not every home needs a laundry. Why can't they all share it?
Co-housing is probably pretty tricky as a product, though.
Definitely a realm for a more interesting use of program, though.
Yeah, it definitely is. The problem is then you've got the resource consent basically is a program. So it basically defines, outlooks, it defines outdoor spaces, and then like traffic and a whole bunch of other things that come into play, and you've got to kind of pull it all together in a way that makes sense for each building, as well as, so they're working together as well as working as individual spaces. So that's why the diagrammatic approach works quite well, because you can actually get a lot of those outlooks in there and the garden spaces, your minimum requirement, and then kind of work around that. But that's what I was talking about before. Like, that's kind of like a mediocre way of designing in comparison to what Gerard's talking about, which I would absolutely love to be able to incorporate more of.
I guess that's what the argument and the success of a project like Block Party is that it's a simple shift in program that probably still easily meets regulatory constraints, but all it took was that one step. We don't have to take 10 steps to make a difference and make a more interesting space. I guess what I'm coming at is that one step can be enough to create something that's quite unique.
That worked well because that was a group of people / friends that came together to build a single product, I guess, in a way. So that works really well.
But if you're looking to say better implement or better understand program in your own work, I guess what I'm getting at is you don't necessarily have to run straight away. You don't have to take this huge conceptual jump or shift in your work. I mean, it can be something quite simple that can have quite a big impact.
I just want to shout out to those block party guys. Like the older I get, this is a little bit of a segue, but the older I get, the more I'm like, how epic would it be to just like live with all your mates on one street? I don't know. Everything just seems like it would be so much more interesting. Maybe that's what society should actually like band together people in places as opposed to working around jobs and that sort of thing. So it's like, okay, cool. Those 100 people get along with each other and those 100 people get along with each other. And it's like basically like setting out like a wedding or something like that. So all of a sudden you're surrounded by people that you really like. And at the very worst, people that are like pretty cool, and the outer rim's a little bit more, so everyone's happy, right? Everyone's happy.
That could be a pretty divisive society, though.
Set up some factions.
Jesus, yeah, you're getting pretty.
Maybe you have a culling every couple of years.
Shit, it's getting questionable here, Ben.
Sounds like Hunger Games or something.
That's so much more interesting.
But like the underlying thought of thinking about program at a city scale, I think is important though. So like, I've never heard somebody, I guess, explain co-housing in that sort of way, which is a lot more compelling than, we're going to do all our recycling and save the planet. Whereas get to live with my mates and hang out. That's a good time. Yeah, I think we're projecting here with a lot of these ideas of outrageous pushing the boundary on things. But I think it's just good to design in a way that you're thinking about how your program is operating. Like, I think it's just another good tool to have in your tool belt if you're looking to create like impact in a space rather than putting a real flash material on. Do you just shift up how the space functions? Like sometimes they can be more impactful than spending lots of money on marble or something.
Totally. And I think that's the bottom line, really. And I guess that's what we're looking to appeal to listeners and other designers out there. And, some people are amazing at it, but, there's equally a huge amount that aren't. Just consider program a bit more, probably.